Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm excited. By the way, happy Valentine's to everybody. I hope that you've got good plans. Mine are quiet. Mine are hanging out with you, which is why I dressed up. You're my date today. So I am super excited about this topic. We're going to be discussing alpha females. I uh I had an interesting encounter with somebody. Actually, it was I have a post on Facebook that did so in on TikTok. It did so in Instagram. But it's I think it's like something like 50 some thousand people have seen it in Facebook, and it's getting all sorts of comments. Not very nice comments, I have to say. But it's got me into this whole topic of alpha female, which I have to admit, I kind of ignore oops, I'm sorry. I ignore cultural trends. I'm not really big into the news. So usually I find out things late in the game. I find out things usually in the comment section. So this idea of a alpha female to me was really new. And what I was experiencing in the comments of this was a lot of antagonism about women and dating and but I also think that it's also a lot of antagonism in general about women in relationships. It wasn't just limited to looking for dates, but it was also kind of being levied about what women want in relationships in general. So I was quite shocked about it. But I thought, I brought it up last week and I thought, let's get into this. Let's talk about it. And I thought I would do some research into what is it about, why is there so antagonism, which was interesting because when I got into the research online, I actually found that people were positive. There was a lot of really great reports about that so-called alpha female, which but if you look at the comment threads, you'd see a lot of antagonism about it, a lot of anger about it. So let's dive into this topic today. Let's talk about what is an alpha female? What is really actually even an alpha male? What's happening between the sexes? I actually have, and I have for those of you who are interested, I actually have references. I have research references. So if you're interested, I got to find a way to sort of broadcast that to you to let you know how to find those references because it's really fascinating. So what is an alpha? Let's start with an alpha male. What is an alpha male? It's interesting that it came out of the studies, and I'm trying to remember who did it. There was a guy who studied this in the 1940s, looking at a pack of wolves. That's where the idea came from. And he found and by the way, it was a pack of wolves in captivity, not in nature. So it was really a very unique setting. It wasn't actually real life setting. And later he tried to retract what he found in research, and they wouldn't let him. He said it actually doesn't apply to wolves. It's not true. It was only true to wolves in captivity, not wolves in nature. But he found that there is a like one leader, a male leader who tends to dominate the pack, sort of sets the tone. It's the wolf that eats first. It's the wolf that keeps the rest of everybody in line. What's interesting though is when he went back to look at wolves in nature, he found that it was a couple. It was a pair. Now remember, wolves mate for life. So it was the pack, the wolf pair that was the alpha, not just the male wolf was alpha. But you also see sort of a similar thing happening with lions. It's the female who hunts, not the male. So it's kind of interesting that not always is it the male who leads in all mammals across the animal kingdom. It's just in some. But they did find the idea of an alpha male. They did find it in another location in nature. It happens among some primates. It's some primates. It doesn't happen in all the primate groups, but some of the primate groups do have an alpha male who's ahead of the pack leader. Now, here's an interesting part, because if you ever watched, now sharing something about my watching habits, I like Tarzan. I watched Tarzan all the way back when I was a little girl in the 1930s with the black and whites, with that kind of funny sound. Anyway, there was a kind of a new remake of Tarzan, not the one with the guy who did Mummy, not him, but there was another one a little more serious, and they showed about how the guy had to like take on all the strongest primates in order to win, to be the alpha male so he didn't get killed. Well, interestingly enough, that's actually not what happens in the alpha male in the primate world. It's kind of a fluky thing. They can't figure out how it's chosen. They said it may even be kind of a little bit of luck that that primate male happens to be in the right place at the right time, and they end up being selected as the alpha. So it's really kind of like trashes the idea we have going for alpha males in the real in our world. It doesn't. So it's interesting. It's interesting. And if you're interested in learning more about, there's the science magazine called Discover has a great article called The Science of Alpha Males in Animal Species. That's where you can find this research. It was really interesting. Again, that title is, it's in the Discover magazine. It's called, the title is The Science of Alpha Males in the Animal Species. For those of you who don't know who I am, let me stop and introduce myself. I'm Dr. Kerry Kerr McAvoy. I'm a psychologist. I have over 20 years of counseling experience. It's just because I started out talking about alpha and females. Obviously, I have a PhD in psychology. I was married for 31 years. I was widowed about 8 years ago. And I was in a brief marriage for 2 years. That was about 4 years ago. Actually, I met the person about 6 years ago, was in that relationship 2, 3 years, which highly toxic relationship. I got divorced in 2019. So these days I'm single. And I don't counsel these days, although I counseled for over 20 years. And I counseled couples. I was a couples counselor. I saw adults was my primary group of clients. And so I saw all sorts of, and plus I've treated people for 20 years. So I saw all sorts of kind of people come through my office, men, women. The average client of a therapist is a woman. She's usually married or or single. She's usually a mom, and she's usually working. Just to give you an idea of my client base, that was what my client base looked like. I did have males that came in and saw me, but men aren't usually a huge consumer of therapy. And you might say, well, maybe it's because you're a woman and they didn't want to see a woman, they wanted to see a man. That actually isn't true. Men don't usually feel comfortable talking to a man. They don't usually share their softer side with men. They share their softer side with women. They share it with their mother, maybe, and if they're not, they may actually share it with their wife or their girlfriend. So when it comes to looking for a therapist, men usually feel safer talking to a female therapist than actually a male therapist. Now, I think that changes when men and women go in for couples work, couples therapy. I think in those cases, men often like to have a male therapist because they sort of have the idea that the guy will have a better perspective, his view, and he doesn't really want to be ganged up by two women. I get that. But I did treat couples. They came into the office for all sorts of problems. So this is not an area that I'm not experienced in and that I haven't done work in. But what's interesting is now that I'm single and I'm older, I'm kind of a more later stage woman. I'm kind of seen as an alpha female, which is why my video is getting so much traction on one of the platforms, is because I'm overeducated. According to those who are responding, I'm overeducated. So let's dive into a little bit about the science of alpha and beta males. And what are we even talking about when we talk about alpha females? So I thought that was really interesting because as I started out with this whole topic today, I was unfamiliar with the term until it started cropping up on my feed. And those of you who want to take questions, I'd be happy to take questions or dialogue around this, but I want to just kind of present some information first, and then let's talk about it. And normally I talk about narcissistic abuse and kind of dysfunctional relationships, but today I'd really like to stick to the topic of gender roles, the big topic of gender roles. And I would really like to kind of look into what's happening here. And then I want to kind of wrap up today with giving you some of my professional thoughts about it based upon my clinical experience, based upon my educational experience, and just some observations I have being in this realm and seeing kind of what's happening. I know that, I just want to give you some of my clinical experiences about it. So it's interesting, the idea of an alpha female. And well, I want to tell you something else that's interesting about all of this, because you have to always read research with a bias. You have to know what's the researcher's perspective, not only whether or not the research project was set up correctly, like was there enough subjects. For example, if you ever see a research project that has less than 30 people, less than 30 subjects, it's not research. You don't have any statistical validity to say your assumptions you're making are valid. You have to have You have to have a minimum of 30 subjects. Okay. So just know that you see less than 30. Like, for example, there's a big Tinder study that men, I hate to say, like to refer to more than women. It had 27 subjects. 27 subjects. Already it's you throw it out. It's not valid. But a lot of guys like to go and reference it as points of tension. It's not valid. Now there is an OK Cupid study with thousands of subjects. Now that stands up. There's right there, you know that at least the base. I'm not saying they collected the research correctly or that it wasn't a biased collection, but I'm saying at least you have a subject, you have a sample size that's valid. Okay, so let's go back to research in general. Now, are you aware that research up till recently just primarily studied male college students, white male college students? So when you see stuff coming out of the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, and even into the 70s, you're seeing primarily studies that were done on a very selective sample size that tends to then exaggerate the differences between male and female. Then there's other research that's been done that they call beta research, and those assume that whatever they find for one gender is applicable to the other gender. So if they study men, they think that whatever they find is applicable to females. If they study females, they think whatever they find is applicable to males. So both of those are kind of like biased research. It's not really, so it's kind of like makes it, you have to question it. So what do I think's going on here? I think really what we're struggling with at a large level, if you kind of like peer back, roll back, and look at the heart of this whole thing, we're actually saying this. This is the questions that I think kind of existentially, intrinsically, we're asking. We're asking what gives a person value, and why are some people found attractive and others are not? And how do we manage our strengths and weaknesses in a relationship so we feel safe, we feel like we have an important role to play, and yet we also at the same point, whether we like to admit it or not, we don't really want to be pushed outside our comfort zone. I think those are the big kind of the issues surrounding the idea of an alpha female. But what is an alpha female? So apparently, according to research, it's a woman who has leadership roles that are she believes in her self identity. She has confidence in what she does. She tends to be she believes she can be impactful, and she tends to be highly ambitious. That is an alpha female. I'd love to know what you guys think. Do you agree or disagree with that definition? This is what I found when I went out there. I looked at the science of people and the science of an alpha female. Again, let me state those. An alpha female is somebody who believes her ability to achieve is limitless. She herself sees herself as powerful. She sees herself as capable of being a leader. She showcases leadership qualities. She's recognized by others as impactful. And she has high ambitions. What do you guys think? Does that define an alpha female in your viewpoint? What I kind of see in the comments to my video about this, and I wasn't really actually talking about alpha females. I was just talking about dating in my 50s and 60s. That's really what the video had to do with. But the guys who were responding was saying, the reason you're having trouble dating in your 50s and 60s is because you're an alpha female and no man wants an alpha female. That's what was being said to me. Like, thank you very much for that. So you're saying I'm too smart and I'm too educated. But so it's interesting that it's some perceived, I see these lists of qualities that I just read: faith in herself, confidence, leadership, impactful, and ambitious. That sounds like really cool things. I like, wow, I would like somebody like that in my life. I would respect a woman like that, but I'm seeing some guys at least some men are finding that very, very intimidating. One guy went so far to say to me that an alpha female is the reason that the marriages and relationships are being torn apart. That we need to have conservative, traditional roles in the home. That's going to create more safety for men. Yeah. Yeah, so I'm reading the comments that's coming in. Agreed. I don't really like using alpha and beta for gender. I agree with you. I don't really like that either. I find it's Here's what I hate all labels. I really hate all labels. For one, nobody fits a label perfectly. You find a label and you tell me anybody you've ever known that 100% hits every item. They don't. I also think they're constrictive and they're very confining. They fail to appreciate the way that we all are myriads of qualities. We're made up of so richness that it's actually dehumanizing to try to fit people into a label. But for the sake of this discussion, we're just doing this for the sake of discussion because I typically, if you're around me very long, know that I don't like labels. I don't like labels of any kind. But I think it is interesting that you read out there and here's the other thing. You do, like I said, Google this and you'll find that alpha females actually are cooperative, that goes on and says they're programmed for, let me see if I can find it, that they're actually an emotionally independent woman who has a strong purpose and doesn't need anyone to complete her. And at the same time, when she comes into a romantic relationship, she's soft, warm, supportive, and feminine. That's coming out of this research. Isn't that fascinating? Again, let me read that again. She's confident, emotionally independent woman who has a strong life purpose and doesn't need anyone to complete her. But at the same time, when it comes to romance, she's soft, warm, supportive, and feminine. And exactly, I agree with you, MS. To me, that defines a high emotional IQ. All we're really saying is that there are women who have a high emotional IQ, that they know their value, they know what they bring, they know their strengths, they lean into their strengths confidently, they lead with those strengths, but they also have a sense of confidence enough that they can take the back seat when it's appropriate, that they don't need to, because it's an insecure person. Let's look at this from this perspective. It's an insecure person who has to push their ways in every way all the time. That shows actually inflexibility and rigidity. That's not healthy. So a person who's healthy is a person who's flexible and can adjust their role depending on the circumstances. So yeah, it to me that I agree with you, MS. That really is actually a very well put together person. It's a very healthy woman who's like that. And and the other thing I think is interesting is that not we use the idea of alpha male as if this is an aggressive person who's aggressive man, because we're talking about men, aggressive man who always leads with power and strength. I actually think that a, a, a successful alpha male doesn't do that. I think he would be the equivalent opposite. I would say again, he's a confident man who's not afraid to take risks, who has a strong life purpose, is not afraid to lead, but he also knows that there are more than one way to lead. That he would lead in the manner that leads best in that situation. I would think that he would be sophisticated. Now, I know I'm not talking about a lot of so-called self-defined alpha males. I don't see that out there, but I think in a if we were to just look at it from the term of healthy versus unhealthy, that would be a healthy alpha male. Now, interestingly enough, have you heard of the idea? And somebody mentioned sigma female. I don't really know what that is. I would love to have you say more. What is that? But there is an omega man. Have you heard of an omega man? I have not. And there's a beta man. And I've always thought of a beta man as kind of a weak person who sort of like is a milksop. I don't know if that word is still, if you guys know what that means. It's sort of a person who it's the man who's with the wife who always says, yes, dear, anything you want, dear. To me, that's sort of a beta male. But that's not what I actually found was a beta male, if he has a high EQ, he's programmed for partnership. He's not afraid of a strong woman. He's cooperative, but not compliant, accomplished, but not a workaholic. He's assertive, but he's not confrontational. Isn't that interesting? That's quote unquote a definition of a healthy beta male. And then on a mega man, here's what I find is that I agree with you. If someone says all this is pseudopsychology. Yeah, it is because when you go to it's sort of pseudopsychology. Well, the idea of an alpha male is pseudoscience, to be honest with you. When you think that all the animal kingdom, you can find it just in a few instances in a few primate groups, not even all the primate groups. Well, then that's not a universal concept. That's just happens just to be in a few places. There's also places in the animal kingdom where female leads. So it's just kind of interesting that we make these big assumptions about what should be based upon someone's sort of creation of an idea that then they've popularized. I really think is what's happening. But let me read you to the Alpha Omega Man. This comes out of the article called Early Life and Relationships of the Alpha. This actually is out of Forbes. I think came out of Forbes. The big difference between beta man and omega man. The omega is the ultimate narcissist, feels entitled to live off anyone who will support him, and makes little, if any, contributions to the household. He may play video games all day, drink an excessive amount of beer, surf the net, and generally enshrine his adolescence. He has no job to which for self-identity, and he looks down on the working stiffs. Woo! So, whoa, okay. Like I said, I never heard of the Omega Man either. Someone just said good riddance to them. I agree. We don't need more of them in the world. I think we've got enough. And I wonder if some of the trolls who've been in my comments are a bit of the Omega Man, and that's why they're complaining. So let me throw it out there to you all. Do you think that the alpha female and the alpha male, or whatever gender role, do you think they're ruining relationships, ruining the home? Do you think they're the cause of divorce? I'd be curious to see what you think on this topic. Yeah, enshrines adolescence. I agree, Sarah. I love that. That's a great term. Here's what I think. I would really love to hear what your opinion is on all of this. Is that yeah, exactly, Brittany. Is their confidence comes from arrogance, and the narcissism is not real confidence, because we all know the narcissist confidence is actually hiding the insecurity of shame and fear of failure. It's really actually not coming out of leading with strength. It's leading out of fear, which is really, really sad. Yeah. It's just people who have attachment issues ruining it. Yeah, that's a good idea. So someone says the reason we're having problems is because people with attachments. So here's the thing. Do you think, is there a rise of increased problems between the genders? Is there? Bree says, I think toxic masculinity, patriarchy, and emotional immaturity is the issue. That's what some people call it. They call it alpha. Yeah, I do too. But I've noticed, and I know, Bree, you're out here in the platform and you're interacting with people a lot too. Only your platform tends to be more about parenting, toxic parenting. And for anyone who doesn't know who I'm talking about, I'm talking abuse is abuse. You can follow her. She's wherever you guys are at, she's there. She has an amazing platform. I love her stuff. And she primarily talks about abusive family relationships. And so she's even got in some ways, her reach is larger than mine. I know she does thank you, Bree. She does a lot of work in this arena. And I know, Bree, you get a lot of flack. You get a lot of flack for relationship issues, for calling out abusive behavior. And really, this is what I'm doing too. I was actually referencing the way in which we're stigmatizing humans and objectifying it, and that's problematic. Oh, thank you so much, Kim. That it's problematic when we objectify anybody in any way. And for me, I agree with the person who was saying, I just hate labels. I hate them too. It's a form of objectification. And there is no such thing as masculine and feminine energy. This is a pseudoscience that's been created on social media just because it's a great buzzword. That's what I like. It's a fantastic buzzword. So Heavenly says double standards and bias creates distortions in families. Yeah, that's a fascinating point that you're making, Heavenly. I would say that I would say that a lot of us have a lot of fear, and it's fear of showing up authentically. Really showing up authentically. So can I talk about more on the masculinity thought? It's really what we're doing is we're segmenting. I know I have a son that I live with. He's nearly 30. He's very traditional. He's very conservative in his politics. He listens to a lot of the right-wing people, whereas my other sons are very left. So it's very interesting dialogues when we get into politics and we get into cultural issues. And interestingly enough, he and I actually align more closely than I would think around these topics of masculinity. He's a man, for one, and I've raised, by the way, all three of my sons are masculine. My late husband was a man's man. He worked in a man's world. Most of his interactions with colleagues were male, and he was an engineer. He was an engineer in engineering, so it was a very masculine world that he was in. And my sons are quite masculine too. I wouldn't say any of them are beta at any level at all. I wouldn't say that they're as extreme as an alpha, but I also wouldn't say that they're a beta. I would say though that their EQs are decently high, about among all of them. And it's kind of hard not to when you have a mom as a psychologist, right? So we're always labeling feelings. But so what is really the idea of masculine? I think even that's a fascinating question that you're bringing up, Brittany, is it that you have an XY chromosome? Is it really? I mean, yeah, okay. So what we know about neurology is that there are some differences in the way that the brain functions between genders. There are some sexual differences. The corpus callosum that connects the two hemispheres. So you have two hemispheres that sit side by side. And interestingly enough, they've had to remove like the majority of one of the hemispheres due to epilepsy, severe forms of some neurological conditions. And when they've done that, they found that the person with one hemisphere, primarily I'm talking about the neocortex left, that actually personality is different. The neocortex is the right side versus the left side actually has different personalities. Can you believe that? So your right side of your brain and your left side of your brain actually don't always agree. They actually argue sometimes, and they actually have kind of would express you differently. So if you lost part of that of yourself, you would be a little different. You wouldn't be quite who you think that you are. So here we have these two hemispheres, and that's what my point is. They're different. They talk to each other, and they talk to each other by kind of like this. Think of it like a superhighway. It's called the corpus callosum. It connects the two. It's in the center, and it's this big strand of material that runs between them, and it runs the communication between the two of them. Now, in a man's brain, that corpus callosum is not as richly webbed. It doesn't, if the old-fashioned days of telephone wiring, it wouldn't have had as much sophisticated wiring as women's. They think this is an evolutionary difference because what happens is men tend to be a little better at filtering out extra stimuli. They tend to focus more exclusively better. And if you think back to the hunter-gatherers days, that would make them better hunters because they could focus on the prey, not get caught up with whatever else is going on. So they struggle with multitasking in the same way women multitask. Women's, however, is richly connected, and it makes sense. If you're back doing childcare and say you're tending the fire and one of your kids starts to scream in the background, you need to notice that so that you can attend to it, or you wouldn't have a family, So there are kind of differences. We also know there's structural muscular differences and bone density differences. And so it kind of comes across, the way that we're made is different. But when it comes to personality, here's back to what I said about science. Science primarily has looked at one gender and then made assumptions about both. Let me give you, for instance, there's an idea that was kind of floated in the 1980s, late 1980s, about men having a midlife crisis. I think there's been some research that sort of validates that, but it was a theory being proposed by a researcher. Interestingly enough, they never asked if women do. They just assume women do because men do. But then they later came out and said, do really women do that? Or is it different for women because women have hormonal cycles and stages of life? Could it be a different kind of, see what I'm saying? They look at something and make assumptions across that applies to everyone when there actually isn't really the research to support it. So I say all that to go back to the idea of masculinity. What is masculinity? I mean, the simplest base thing that we have is we can say it's an XY chromosome. But there are as many ways that men define masculineness as there are men. And every man is going to do it a little bit differently. And the same with feminine. What's feminine? Every woman, and gender neutral people, they're going to all kind of express their individuality a little bit differently based upon who they are. Interestingly enough, I happen to have a lot of education. Obviously, I have some intelligence for me to be able to do that education. But when it comes to a relationship, I tend to be very supportive. I'm actually quite soft, and I'm a little more on the compliance side, probably, which is how I got into that toxic relationship. I'm probably a little too compliant. I'm not very aggressive. I don't like confrontations. I just don't. So, so you people who then say, well, you're an alpha female, well, they're looking at my education. In fact, these men made assumptions that I'd never been married and then I didn't have kids. And when I came back and said, well, wait, dude, I've been married 31 years and he died. Like, oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I mean, so it's kind of interesting that because my degree, they made an assumption that I'm therefore single, lonely, and have cats. I mean, where are you getting that from? You don't know anything about me. Just because I have an education doesn't mean anything, doesn't really tell you anything about me other than I know a lot about psychology, hopefully. Hopefully. Yeah. So Marvelous Marvin is saying job markets are tough for men. Job for men have been declining at a high rate since the 1965. You can check this out with a Harvard YouTuber called Men Without Work, Dr. Nicholas Eberstad. And then he says, I'm an engineer and I can't do it anymore. I trade stocks now and it's difficult, but it's better than the stress of engineering. Yeah, it is. I think, Marvelous Marvin, that I think that's you're tapping into something that's really powerful here. What you're saying is that I think we're in a shakeup is what's happening. I think that's one of the reasons why there's so much tension is that both genders are sort of struggling finding their footing. What does it mean? I think would you go back and let's go back to the 1950s, which by the way was not a good decade for a lot of people. It wasn't good in the United States for those of color. And it certainly wasn't good for those in the United States if you're a woman. But I think when it came to the 1950s for men, there was greater definition of what it meant. You had a more defined track of life, that you would finish school, whether it meant high school or college, and then you would get a job. It probably was a little bit easier to get a job, and that you would follow that job out, and then you'd have retirement. It was, in other words, the life was a little more defined. And I would say today that it's not that the fact that there's more opportunities for everyone has meant that there's also maybe less structure for those who had structure before, because now there's greater competition. There's less definition. There's less structure. Less predictability. So I can see how that would cause stress for some who are used to having that kind of structure. And it feels stressful. I think I think you're really tapping into something powerful, Marvin. I think that you're tapping into that's why there's so much anger in this even dating realm and around household relationships, around partnership relationships, is the expectations have changed and the expectations are putting greater burden. I think I hate to say this, I don't mean to piss anybody off, but I think it's placing greater burden on men than they've ever had to have before. They're being asked to do more emotionally. They're asked to be more involved at home. They're asked to be more involved with childcare. I know that my late husband had this philosophy. It was what he saw from his own father, was that men worked hard, earned a decent wage. They came home and that was what they did. Their contribution was providing. Well, today that doesn't fly. For one, women are contributing too. And they're working as well outside the home and inside the home. Women often have a second shift of work. That's still, by the way, that study, I met the researchers of that study. It came out of Berkeley, the second shift idea. I'm trying to remember. I think it was Cohan, started with a C. I actually met them in person, interviewed with them. And they were looking at the traditional gender roles in the relationship at home and why there was tension. And they found that men tend to have one job in a day. Women tend to have two. They called it the second shift. And there's a lot of anger among women for this second shift. And this was back in the 80s. And I know they've re-looked at this issue today to see if it's changed in the last 40 years. And it really hasn't. Not a lot, not significantly. I know that some of you guys tell me stories in which you have partners who are involved at both home and work. But I also know there's a lot of homes where there's not an equal shift of that. Marvin said there's 8 billion people in the world now. Other animal populations are declining, but the human population is still increasing. And automation and other technologies have decreased the need for labor. Yeah, that's actually true. I agree. It has. There's a lot of shifts. Not like you said, not only shifts in the work, shifts in expectation for work, well, here's the other thing. So if you go back to the go back pre-1950s, when we were primarily an agricultural country. We were just moving into the industrial age. Yes, we were moving into it since the 30s or so. But pre that, the primary reasons that couples got together was in order to homestead. So we're looking at a division of labor, not really for emotional reasons. It was for practical reasons, for survival reasons. And now relationships are occurring these days, for at least for women, for primarily relationship reasons, for emotional reasons. So here's a question for all the men in the audience. What do you think are the primary reasons men get into relationships now? If women are getting into it because they want to have a partner, we want to have experience of sharing our life with somebody, why are men getting into a relationship? Yeah, I agree, Marvin. It is kind of like doing that. I'm kind of struggling, James, with your viewpoint. The so-called overworked women never as overweight. What is your point? I'm not for sure. I apparently has missed some of this because I'm hearing some tension on one of these platforms. So actually, recent studies says is BS to that. Men don't whine and document all aspects. Aspects of what? Women do less and they have fewer kids. They do less and have fewer kids. I mean, if they're not in a relationship, then how are they carrying their own financial responsibility? I don't. Women do less now and they have fewer children. So you're saying you're saying that research that came out of Berkeley about the second shift is bullshit. Well, that's it. I shouldn't swear. I need to watch my language on these platforms. Um, well, I would challenge you, James, to go look at the research because it's based upon a study. By the way, it was based on these studies are coming out of the part of the United States that are very egalitarian comparatively to the rest of the country. So what I'm saying is they're being conducted in areas of the United States with least traditional roles possible, and they're still showing a prevalence of traditional roles. And they're the least traditional areas of the United States. So it wasn't like being conducted out of Indiana. It was being conducted in California. And it was still showing that there was pretty significant differences between a woman's job and there was another research I came across too that they looked at. I think this came out of Stanford, and it was a man did this research. I think is Michael Rosenfeld, I think, and he was looking at primary reasons why women get divorced or want divorced. And the first top of the reason was because she feels unsupported with her career, and the second was she feels that she carries the burden of the emotional responsibility for the relationship. And the third was she feels that her husband didn't contribute enough around the household. Yeah. So again, there's another research who's actually disagrees with you. And it was a man who conducted the research. So oh, yeah. Well, you're going to always find, James, you're like, oh, well, yeah, but Stanford and Berkeley aren't part of the United States. Well, they are a part of the United States. That's my point, is that they're a very egalitarian place of the United States. And they're still finding this as a problem. So that means it's a problem, because if it's a problem there, it's a problem everywhere. And you can disagree with research, but he's looking at a conducted of studies that would been a good, decent sampling of people. So you're really arguing with somebody who's research. You're saying his design was poor and therefore had no application, really what you're saying, which to me sounds like you're whining, actually, not that we're whining. I think that's interesting. So cat walk out the cat's paw says men get married for tax benefits and a sex partner and a companion, at least in healthy relationships. They get tired of having to go out and find a date. Now, cat walk out the cat paws. Are you male or female? Because that is a very neutral name. So maybe you're neutral, gender neutral, but I'd be kind of curious. So why else do people think men are getting into relationships at the self-reported work surveys? You don't know that. Please go find the study and check that. You're just dismissing it. Yes, in the validity standards of accuracy, I agree. Self-report is not as rigorous as a blind study, but it's hard to do blind studies around these concepts. You do know that, right? It's impossible. You'd have to set up the design that you'd have to set up to do that would be like, woo, I don't think you could. The confounding variables will be too great, and you'd have to match your subject with control. I don't know how much you know about research, but it would be nearly an impossible study to actually design. So of course they're using reports. Of course they are. It's about the other best thing that you could do, James, is to do what Gottman has done, which is he took a set of couples and then he followed them over a long period of time over a longitudinal study and then did extensive interviews where they actually coded the interviews. But that's very expensive, very, very expensive. And then you have a problem of having people stay in the study so that you get really good research out of that. I just feel like you're trying to find a way to discredit it, and and you're having a hard time. Because remember, I have a PhD, so I know a little something about research, and you're having a hard time holding that up. Is making a valid point. What I hear you say, really, I'm going to be therapist for a moment. You don't like what I have to say. That's what I hear you say. So the way to say I don't like it or it makes me uncomfortable is just to say, oh, it's not valid, which you're not really showing the lack of validity. Where is it filed? I have it filed. I don't need to tell you where my dissertation's filed. I completed a PhD. Thank you very much. Anyway, so see, now you're invalidating me. So if you can't invalidate what we're talking about, you're going to go after the person that's called an ad hominem argument, an attack of argument. And it's not about me. It's about the research here. Anyway, thank you, Cat's Paw. You're a 49-year-old married female. Yeah, so that's interesting. I appreciate hearing your viewpoint. Do others of you agree with Cat's Paw? Do you think that men are primarily getting into relationships? Yeah, thank you for muting James. James is getting a little hostile there. Do you think men are primarily marrying for tax benefits and for physical intimacy issues, or do you think there are other reasons? I would say, I think it's kind of, I don't want to be generalizing too much, but I do think that, yeah, he was killing the vibe, Sarah. I do think that there are men who certainly are doing that. There are men who are certainly, but I don't think all men are doing that. I think what's hard is the men who are single as they get older in life are very different from the men who are in a stable long-term relationship. That's what we're seeing. So really, the sample out there is very biased. You missed the call, Brittany. Yeah, you did. You missed a lot of really good action there. Yeah, the sample size that we're talking about is very, very biased. We're talking about men who are single as they get into their 40s, 50s, and 60s versus men who are still in a long-term marriage that they've been in since out of college. Marvin, I really love your ideas. Marvin, he says most of mental health problems come from inadequate sleep, negative environments, no exercise, poor diets, and other unhealthy. That's good. Yeah, I want a girlfriend, but I've just given up. There's too many issues in the past, and I need to work on me. Marvin, man, you're coming across more and more cool all the time. I have to say, I'm really impressed with you, very much so. I hope don't give up. And here's the other thing. I want to say this is an off-the-cuff comment. Just talking to Marvin for a moment. Marvin, what I'm finding is that the best combination of doing the work and getting healthier is to try to have a relationship with somebody and then have a therapist coach on the side to work on the issues as they come up so that you can keep yourself in line and work on your fears so that your fears don't run the show, so your insecurities don't run the show. That's actually kind of like the best way to go at it, is not to just say, hey, I can't because I feel too messed up, but to try and work on yourself in the moment. Yeah, I'm still looking for someone to say why men are wanting relationships. My fear is what I'm seeing in the dating world is that this is what I noticed in the dating world. And I feel kind of, again, I know this is a very biased sample, very, very biased. And this is interesting. That's the dating world that's fussing about alpha females. Men are anyway. I don't know what the women are fussing about because I'm not on that side. So I really can't speak to that. And I'm not saying, please hear me everywhere. I'm not saying that women are healthier. I'm not saying that. I know that we're not. I know that both genders and even non-genders have a lot of issues. So I'm really, really not saying that. But what I have noticed, there's a great fear of intimacy, a huge fear of risking, being vulnerable, showing our hearts, getting invested in a person. And so the easy way for people to do that is we tend to opt out to the easiest option of it. For men, it's physical intimacy. The way to keep your heart out of it is just to see it as a hookup or something that's temporary. For women, I'm not for sure what we're doing because, like I said, I'm not trying to date women. So I don't, maybe women are doing the same. Maybe women are just seeing this as casual, temporary, and trying to keep it really like uninvested. But what we're really saying is we're coming from a place of fear. We're operating out of insecurity rather than out of security and confidence in ourselves. So Marvin said, I lived in a world of narcissism and trying to purge that from my life. I am too. I'm really done had it with that. So Royal Hezekiah said, men age and health begins to fade. It's important to have someone with character who's emotional and financial who would be a major reason for getting into a relationship. Thank you for saying that. The fact there was a guy who jumped in on that thread that where I was getting bashed and who'd said the same thing. He said, I think you're having a lot of issues, guys, and you're looking at things in a really weird way. Yeah, so somebody said Kim said my ex was a pure mommy's boy. Oh, so here's another guy. I met Garth said, "Oh, Garth, you're back." I love Garth's comments. Garth said I met my wife when we were in our late 20s and we've been together for 15 years and we now have one kid. So, why do you think men are getting into relationships? Here's one of the things I have heard, and I'll tell you guys, I hear it a lot. Now, I'm not right now on any dating apps. I would date if somebody popped up kind of miraculously in my life, but I'm not doing any work to find somebody. So it's kind of like it would have to be a miracle. But the guys, when I was on the dating app, and I'm talking from I was on dating apps for about a couple years ago, and then I did just 3 months this late last year. What I've noticed is a lot of them say they don't want to be alone. A lot of them are afraid to be alone and they don't want to die alone. That's what they say. They don't want to die alone. And this last guy, I went out 4 times with somebody and just told him, no, thank you. He's not emotionally sophisticated at all. I mean, he's totally not interested. His interest in me was zero. I would say I had a bad day and he'd say, wow. Okay. Okay. There's no interest in me. I mean, there was interest in me, but there wasn't interest in me. But that's the first thing he said on the date. The first date was he said, I am so alone. I am so alone. And I think he didn't want to be alone. He said he had COVID twice, and he said it was profoundly painful. And he really felt so isolated. So I think what he was trying to do is I think he was trying to reduce his isolation. But, really, yeah. I mean, yeah, exactly. So, yeah, I'm coming back to what some other my experience of guys are waiting to be taken care of. That's interesting too. Do you guys think that? Do you guys agree with that? Do you think that a lot of men are just saying, "Hey, I just don't want to be responsible for everything in my life. So I really want somebody who's no, this guy didn't have Asperger's. No, he actually told me I confronted him about that. Catspaw, I actually said, I'd like you to be interested in things that interest me. If you guys watch the video about that's women's details, men aren't interested. What he basically said was, and he would tell me about his life. He was saying, I want you interested in my life, but I have no intention to be care about your life at all. That you show up in my life. I think it was more for sex, not. I just met him, so that that wasn't happening. But I think that's he was more interested in the attraction, the potential for that, than he was really interested in having a shared emotional experience with somebody. Yeah, it was quite selfish. He'd never been married, and he's in his mid-50s, so it showed, unfortunately. And I'm not saying that's true about every man who's never been married. Please hear me. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying in his case, it showed. And I said that to him. I broke it off yesterday and said, listen, I really need you to be as fascinated in me as I am with you. And I don't feel it. I don't think he's a narcissist. No, I don't. I didn't see that. He actually was emotional and he was self-reflective and he respects boundaries. Every boundary I ever set, he respected. Now, granted, it's early. He could have been love bombing, but I don't think so. But on the other hand, he wasn't really what I was looking for either. So Royal says, no, men that I know are not looking to be taken care of. I think there's too much movie magical thinking about relationships that they dive first without really researching the person. So Royal, tell me what you think men really are looking for then, because I can tell you're a man and that this is something that you're familiar with yourself. So I would really love to know what you think people are looking for. Marvin said on dating apps, women are respond only to 5% of men's posts, where men have a higher response rate than women. I think women are today are more selective than they've ever been. I agree. I know that I was. But here's the problem that would happen, Marvin. If I gave somebody a chance, several things would happen. Okay. So I can tell you what happens if I'm more generous in my, and here's what I was looking for on the apps for any guy who actually knows how like you care. Maybe you don't care. This is how I was weeding them out. If anybody said in their app, no drama, you're out, because or you're already setting the table to say that anything that I'm not happy about is creating drama. I'm not being set up that way. That's to me a set up. Any man who hit too fast with words, dear, baby, honey, any of that, you don't know me. We don't have a relationship. We've not met. We are not dating. Please don't use those words. There's affectionate words that elicit an emotional response that feels manipulative. I'm not saying a guy was trying to be manipulative, but it just doesn't feel, it doesn't feel appropriate. Any guy who came across too angry, like I'm not here to play games, or they made some kind of hostile statement. Hey, Jordan, I also was out because I didn't want to deal with anybody who's obviously carrying like hostile baggage into the next relationship already. That to me is an out. And then I was open to anybody responding after that. I mean, so as long as you didn't already put qualifications, I knew that I didn't fit. Some men are very careful to say, I take good care of myself. I want someone who does. That's code for, I don't want a woman who's a plus size. I'm a plus size woman. I'm not going to put myself in the position of rejection. So if they're already stating I'm not fitting their criteria, why would I engage? I'm not engaging. I don't know if men know that they're doing that, but they're already excluding segments of women by what they say. Maybe they're not thinking that through far enough, but women do think those things through. And if you say you want someone who's fit and you're fit, you're telling that you don't want people who are fat. Well, I'm not fit. Am I fit? Well, I work out every day, but am I not fat? No, I'm overweight. So I would pass you by. Then what happens if I match with somebody, which I would occasionally actually send matches just to see what would happen. Probably of all the people I sent matches, less than half responded on me. So they were passing over me just as badly. And what those that did, though, they couldn't carry on a conversation. They would say, hey, what are you doing? Did you have dinner? What'd you eat? I'm sorry. Can we talk about something more than dinner and what I had for dinner? It just feels to me like, you don't really, I mean, how are you doing today? What are you doing today? What are you looking forward to this weekend? What kind of hobbies are you into? Where, really, tell me something about you. Tell me, share something. And then what would happen? I would try to like sustain that for a little period of time. And then there would never be another move ever. It would just stay there chatting. Well, that to me then is somebody who's actually not serious. They like the idea of being chosen. They don't really want the idea of actually connecting and meeting up. So then I just sort of like, I let it go. So Evil Shelator says 40 to 60% of people who are on dating apps are avoidant. It feels that way. That's a fascinating statistic. Fascinating. So for me, don't already disqualify me by what you say that you're looking for. Don't carry your hostility into the few words you've got to be able to say about who you are and what you're looking for. Don't set me up emotionally responsible by saying things no drama or don't mess stuff around. And then when you actually match, please ask some questions. No, here's an idea for all of the guys who want some help. And please hear me clearly on what I'm saying. Go to ChatGPT and ask for ideas of great conversation starters for an app. Now, I'm not telling you to go ask the open AI what to say. Don't cut and copy what it says to say to me, but ask for some good tips and suggestions of where to go, like subjects. I've been using ChatGPT for ideas like hashtags and long tail keywords and stuff for my apps and stuff, I mean, I think it's a great way to generate if you're kind of dry on ideas and you're a little scared about bringing something up, then ask the AI. It may have some good suggestions, but just don't cut and copy. I don't want to have a conversation with an AI. I want to have a conversation with a real person. So that part to me is unethical, that if you then use it as a way to have a conversation, but I think it's a great way to spark some ideas about what to talk about. Yeah, exactly. You could say to the chat GPT, I'm a man looking for a woman who has these type of interest. What could I talk to her about? And see what it says. Roy says, for a woman to understand the relationship as a partnership instead of a dictatorship, also having the ability to understand that we're here to have our respective needs met in a healthy manner. Absolutely. I agree with you 100%. Marvin says, I need to check out Dr. Mendel. He said apple cider vinegar is changing his life. Well, that's interesting. I've heard of that. I kind of like always get a little cautious with it. Feels like, is it research based? But I'll check it out. Thank you for the suggestion. Thank you, Mama Bear. I appreciate that. Thank you so much. Yeah, so that's what I do have wondered. You know, the idea of that research paper saying that the 40 to 60% of people on, does everybody know what avoidance attachment style is? That means that when it comes to the real opportunity to connect, you get scared and you tend to pull back, you would withdraw. It's certainly what I'm experiencing. I'm a person, here's what my bias on these apps, and of course I had to be really, I sensed that there was a lot of avoidance out there, so I didn't say this, but my thought was, can we at least meet? Because nothing of this is that was happening between us up to now is real until I actually get to see you, see how you walk, see how you talk, see what your life is about, see what you're into. You know, we need to meet, because none of this, that then becomes real, and then we have real information to say, yes, this is going to work, or no, it's not. But most, at least, I don't know, maybe women aren't meeting either, but most of them didn't want to meet. Yeah. Yeah. So Adam Lane is the guy on attachment styles. Interesting. Thank you for that suggestion of where that paper came from. Here's the thing that I find that I struggle with is that when I meet a new person, I'm so intrigued by them that I just want to pepper them with lots of questions. So how did it today go? How did that make you feel that today went that way? Had that happened to you? I mean, I'm like, woo, I'm so, and then I find like, whoa, that's a little intense. Maybe they don't want all that intensity. So I tend to pull myself back and rein myself in. So women are the same. You find the same with women, and you're a lesbian. That's fascinating. Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that, because that's what I said. I don't really know what women are like. So women do kind of the same sort of process. Fascinating. So, Ark, are you a male or female? They use us and dump us. I kind of love to know your perspective. Actually, thoughtful jokes are often the best icebreakers for me. Women often let down their guard. If we can't laugh together, opens the door for us to at least to cry together. That's a great point. I love that. That's a really great point. Hey, Debbie, so good to see you. So Frost says, how are the other relationships with friends, colleagues, children, parents, animals, natures? For me, it's almost alienated. That's interesting. I do think that a lot of us are struggling with lots of fronts like that. Honestly, I feel more comfortable with men, especially at work. I do think men there is less layering of nuances and tension. I do think that's true. So, Ark, you're a guy. So they use you for what? Can you answer what they're using you for? And by the way, since I don't think have you been on a lot of this live? I asked an earlier question. The question earlier, Ark, was, what are men wanting in a long-term committed relationship? Are they looking for companionship? Are they looking for emotional support? Are they looking for physical intimacy? Are they looking just so they're not alone? What do you think men are looking for? I would be curious to see what you think. Wow, this time has flown by today. We are here already an hour. Yeah. Hopefully you will see this in time. So a mother, hopefully you'll see this in time. So what are you saying, Brittany? What women need to be romanticized? Most men. Oh, yeah, I do agree. Even that guy I said no thank you and goodbye to yesterday, he never brought out Valentine's Day. Now, I'm not one of these big people into, oh, please, where are the flowers? And did you get the chocolate? And what kind of date are we having? And where's the jewelry? No, I'm not like that. But it would have been nice to have, he never mentioned it at all. I know what he wanted to watch, and I know that he was upset to hear that the what he liked to watch was pay is premium channel, not a free channel, and that I happened to have it, that he didn't, and I think he would have loved me to invite him over so he could watch the whole binge watch for that, but, it's not very sensitive. So, for women, yeah, women use you. Yeah, yeah, I'm sure, Art, it's mostly the narcissistic ones, but I'd be really curious what they use you for what? For financial things? Is that what you're saying? So, we should start our own dating app. Yeah, people have tried that, Debbie. It has been done on these platforms. In fact, these platforms are seen as the new dating apps. I don't know if you knew that. There's articles coming out about that. I don't know how well it would work, honestly, though. I don't. I think that it would be it's tricky. It's really tricky. In fact, I joined a Facebook group off of one of these platforms in order to find, sort of like a group. And sure enough, before long, when it got more people joined, it felt just like being on a dating app. It really didn't have a lot of the healthiness of it degraded. That's kind of sad to say. So what I'm really telling you is people are people. Wherever they're at, they're people. So yeah, generalization. I don't think anybody likes generalizations, honestly, because generalizations miss the nuances of people. Oh, thank you, Debbie. I probably would do a decent job of matchmaking, but it's not a job I want. And I'd love to meet someone who's good at matchmaking me. Relationships are a give or take, but today's competitive society teaches us to be more give or more take more than give, and we're living in a mentality of scarcity. I agree, Marvin. Here's an interesting study. This is I'm going to end on this. And Ark, I'm really sorry to hear that you've been manipulated and exploited, and you feel miserable when it's all said and done. I have a feeling, Ark, that you're probably having the same problem that a lot of us are having, and that you're meeting the wrong type. That there are other types that probably you're not seeing or not getting a chance either to meet because they're not in the locations you're looking. But yeah, I know that's not true. I mean, it's not true about me, for example. Not that I'm but I know it's not true for a lot of women that I know. I could name names of women I know that do not do that at all. That you not even describing remotely that characteristic. But yeah, let me end on this fascinating study today. So they looked at the scarcity model. That's kind of what you're talking about, Marvin, and abundance model. So it's actually had to do with choice. It's how the abundance of choice is creating problems. So they had a grocery store, and you want a tall alpha female. Well, tall is tall. Oh, well, I'm alpha female. I'm 5'7". I don't know if I'm not short, but I'm not like 6 foot either. Anyway, back to this grocery store. They had a grocery store with jam, and they had 8 different types of jam, and they asked people to sample the jams, and then they noticed how many people bought the jam from tasting the jam. And then they had a separate setup where they had 24 types of jam. And again, people got to taste the jams, and then they watched the number of sales. Guess which group? Was it the less option group or the more option group that made more sales? It was the less option group. The idea that they're thinking with dating here is that when we have this idea of a never-ending supply, that if this doesn't work out with this person, that there's somebody that maybe even there's somebody, the perfect person out there, that we then really struggle to find satisfaction at any level at all. So just a thought, just a kind of thought to leave us with. And thank you so much for this today. This was a lot of fun. We had a lot of energy talking about alpha females. I want to invite you back to next week. Next week, I'm going to dive. If you missed it, I once did a NPD because I'm a psychologist. I took the DSM-5 and the characteristics of a narcissistic personality disorder, and then I went and compared it to whether or not that's abusive, and to see how well it matched up. What I want to do in this next time is I want to take antisocial personality disorders, compare it to narcissism, NPD, and then also compare it to abusiveness, and let's kind of see what we think. So I hope you'll come back next Tuesday to join me for that. And then on Thursday is my next breathing exercise, and we're going to be doing grounding. We're going to be doing grounding work. So if anybody of you are struggling with regulation of yourself, regulation of your emotions, make sure you come back on Thursday at 1:00 Central Standard Time for a grounding experience. We're going to do that. And thank you so much, guys. This was just a lot of fun. My mother would say this, I don't think we solved the world's ill, but we sure had fun talking about it. And that's how I feel today. I feel like we may not have solved anything, but at least we got a chance to sort of banty these around, and this has been a lot of fun. So thank you so much for all of this. You guys have a great rest of the day. Bye bye.